Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So today we are talking about ENFJ careers. So if you're an ENFJ personality type, we're going to talk about your career options, your choices, maybe how to think about careers. We've got a particular way we want to talk about this today. This actually came about through our personality life path mentorship. We've been doing this mentorship with people where we each week over 8 weeks, culminating a live event, we spend time looking at the archetypical energy of each of the Jungian cognitive functions and the area of life that these deal with. And each week we're going through this process because a lot of people know their personality type, who they are, how they're wired. You as an ENFJ listening right now, you know you're an ENFJ. Okay, now that you know that, where are you headed in life? What's your career, relationships? What's the path, the life path in front of you? And so we're doing a lot of work around attuning those energies to find that life path. And I've noticed that a lot of people in this program, we have several ENFJs and other types, but a lot of people in the program are in a transition moment in their life. Now, maybe it might be relationship, might be life transition, like a stage of life. But a majority of people are talking about career changes. Maybe somebody's been in a career for a while, and they're realizing it's run its course. They need to make a change. A few people are starting out in new careers, or they're just kind of getting started in life. So this has been a theme that we thought we'd address today, particularly for you listening as an ENFJ, because you might be in a career transition moment. You might be right out of university or out of high school looking to start your career for the first time. You might have done a career for a while. You want to change course. Maybe during lockdowns and the pandemic, that was a tough time and you're looking to do a reset. So as we talk about this today, we're coming from a principle level place, not topical, and we're going to hopefully give you some ideas and things to think about as you're thinking about attuning to the vocation and the career path for your life.
Yeah. Our friend, Dr. Dario Nardi, has been working on this, some research around what he's now calling subtypes. He was reluctant to call them subtypes. He wanted to call them flavors at first.
Yeah. Because
they're variations of each of the types that has some flexibility to it. Meaning that it seems like we come pre-wired with our personality type. Like if you have ENFJ preferences, that seems to be something that the best information we have right now indicates that that's something that's born in. But how that type shows up and the different ways that it can show up, that seems to be more nurture than nature. And one of the most influential components to that is a career choice, especially after the age of 25. So our careers are not only something that we're trying to match our personalities to and find something that is in our wheelhouse and feels good to us. It's also something that is going to be highly influential in the kind of person we become over time.
Yeah.
So our careers are pretty important, which makes sense because we spend 40 plus hours a week doing them as a general rule. So what we want to do is in this episode, we want to talk about not just the careers that ENFJs tend to choose, but we want to talk about those different flavors of ENFJ types and the kind of careers that you might choose depending upon which of those subtypes you must identify with right now. It might explain why you're seeking a career change or you're ready for something different. Maybe you want to explore or flex a different aspect of your personality. And it also makes it so that there's more options on the table because I think we have a tendency to unnecessarily limit our choices based on our best fit type, like our perception of what that type would want.
Yeah, and sometimes people do research online and they go, I'm an ENFJ, what's the best career for me? Like, what should I do? And just following the script that the internet kicks back to you may not be the best option. In that vein, I did my research, Antonia.
Yeah.
I brought my list to this episode
of
the top 10 ENFJ, according to the internet out there in general. This is the top 10 list for ENFJ's career choices. This is what the internet says. Number 1 is teacher, especially at the secondary level. Manager supervisor, number 2. Counselor therapist. Human resource manager, nonprofit manager, marketing advertising executive, salesperson, event planner, social worker, and then number 10 is politician or diplomat. So, I mean, that's a pretty good list that I'm sure if you're an ENFJ listening, you're like, yeah, I could see myself in some of those roles. But what if you're an ENFJ, you're like, man, I'm drawn to other careers besides those maybe stereotypical careers the internet would say. what do I do? Do I just have to buy one of those, or are there other options for me to lean into as far as my vocation in the world?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that, and I think that's a solid list. Every episode we've done of these, you've brought a list of 10 things that are good, good choices for each of the types. And usually the list is solid. It's a solid list. But I'm also hearing things on the list that certain subtypes would actually excel at.
Yeah.
And other subtypes might really struggle with. It might be way out of their wheelhouse. So I think that's the other piece is let's go through these subtypes and talk about why they might be attracted to some of those on the list and others not at all.
Yeah, and usually the stereotypes are like one of the subtypes overtakes all the others as the representative energy of an ENFJ. And it's like, well, that's how ENFJs are. Like, well, that's one flavoring of ENFJs are like that. But maybe there's a lot of them. And so they end up getting all the research and all the things talked about. So you may be a little bit differently wired ENFJ than the others. Let's talk about that today. And we're coming from a principled-based approach as well. We're not going to tell you what exact career to go toward, but we are going to talk about the energies and the attunements of these different styles or expressions of ENFJ that might give you some indication of which career to go toward.
Yeah, and that is very true. There tends to be one of the subtypes or flavors of each of these types that dominate the stereotypes. They become our image of what that type looks like. We talked about, in one podcast, we talked about ISTJs, and the normalizing subtype is the ISTJ stereotype.
Yeah.
And we also talked about types like ESFPs, where I would say that the creative ESFP is the stereotype. So let's go through these and see which one is the stereotype for ENFJ.
Okay, so the 4 subtypes, I'll just list them here and we'll go into them in depth in a moment. There's the dominant subtype, the creative subtype, normalizing ENFJ subtype, and harmonizing ENFJ subtype. And these represents different expressions. You could almost say that ENFJ is like the song, the music sheet, the musical notes on a page. And these subtypes are the performance of that song, the expression. So it can be expressed differently. The timing can be different, all that from a song. But the song itself is still sound. Like you're still an ENFJ, you just express maybe differently.
Right, exactly. And by the way, if you're brand new, if you just discovered you have ENFJ preferences and you're new to all of this, we are going to talk about some of the technical aspects of this, but I think you'll be able to hear yourself in the description of the subtypes. So just hang with us, and I think that it's going to be useful for you, even if you're new to all of this. If you are a type geek, I'll also be speaking to you, or we'll be speaking to you and giving you some of that more technical aspect. So let's start with Let's start with the dominant ENFJ subtype. Now, if you are a type geek, basically what this means is that your first 2 cognitive functions, so in this case, extroverted feeling or what we call harmony, and introverted intuition or what we call perspectives, both of them have an energy of assertiveness, because each of the cognitive functions can have both an assertive, sort of focused, directive energy, and they can have a receptive, more peripheral experience, meaning that they're taking in, sometimes your cognitive function is really focused on one thing and really is moving towards that one goal, but it doesn't see things in the side, nothing in the peripheral. And sometimes your function is a little bit more open and sees things in the peripheral, but maybe struggles to make something specific happen. And the dominant ENFJ, both of those functions are directive. They're focused. They're technically called analytic versions of the functions. And that's what creates the dominant subtype. But as far as characteristics go, these are charismatic leaders, right? They're the ones who are really anchored in their values. They are pretty certain that they know what is needed for society to improve, and they gain the needed insights to get there. Okay, so they have a lot of certainty. They're good at herding cats, staying on message, believing that this is what society or at least the culture needs, and getting people there.
I always think of this as almost like older sibling energy. Like, I'm going to take charge. I'm going to help get the needs of the family, all the other kids that are younger than me, organized. Again, metaphorically, not literally, although it could be literal too. The older sister, the older brother, the one that's going to help mom and dad rally the troops and get something done. That's often, I think, this energy of the dominant.
Yep, exactly. They have strong executive and managerial skills. They are skilled at deduction, step-by-step planning, abstract concepts, and metaphor. They are naturals at communicating, so they are very good at communicating what it is that they are trying to get everybody to move towards, and they sort of have a herding cats mentality. They are dramatic, assertive figures as a general rule, right? They have sort of a flair about them, and they're willing to use drama to, get everybody going in the direction that they need to go. They're very anchored in their values, and there's still an idealism about them, right? So they have an idealistic perspective of how society should look, and they're very good at moving people towards that outcome.
These are also the types you're going to see in like boardrooms, corporate America, not just the older sibling energy, but going for a career path that's more in leadership, executive ranks, things like that.
Right. And especially since they are the type that don't back down from confrontation.
Yeah.
Right. They have an assertiveness about them that makes them willing to, do what needs to be done in order to make it all happen. And so unsurprisingly, the kinds of career choices that dominant ENFJs find themselves in is anything that is basically they fill group leadership roles, right? They are educators, they're policy gurus, they're spiritual guides. They very much gravitate to any sort of educational leadership combination. You'll find them in politics. You'll find them in the highest levels of, like you mentioned, executive roles. And you're going to see them, even if they're not in those like sort of bigger, boardroom situations, maybe they're leading the, sort of the local PTA, or they're highly involved in their community, really trying to move things forward. There's a sense that there's a liaison quality about them as well, sort of helping people bridge gaps in order to get the bigger community going towards the ultimate goal.
I think this can be a stereotypical ENFJ, but I wouldn't say this is the subtype that a lot of people think of as ENFJs. Would you agree with that? Is that something that, or do you think this is the one that is the stereotype locked in online, this dominant?
I think that dominant ENFJ types, I think actually this is closer to the stereotype than where we're about to move, which is the creative type.
Well, let's do that. Let's go over the creative now. What does this type look like?
Okay, so if dominant types are more driven and confident, then creative subtypes are more social and creative. And this is more of an ENFJ that is open-ended. So technically, on the technical side, for the type geeks, the judging cognitive function is going to be that more holistic, diffused style, that more peripheral style. So in this case, it would be extroverted feeling or harmony. That's going to be the one that's a little bit more open-ended, more less focused and driven. But the perceiving function, in this case, introverted intuition or perspectives, that is going to be more assertive. It's going to be more driven. So the creative, intuitive side is going to be the one that has more certainty, and the judging or feeling side is going to be the one that's a little bit more open. And so that creates like a general openness inside the person themselves. And in fact, they tend to have trouble with things like sticking to mundane tasks because of it. Like there's more of a desire to keep things open-ended and interesting and creative than there is to get things done and make things happen. So they're not as tuned into the managerial component. They are more adaptive. They're good at improvising. They're good at expressing themselves. They are exploratory. They're still excellent at auditory skills, and like they're very tapped into body language, vocal tonality, and there is a goal focusedness for them, even though there's not as much of a management focus. So in some ways, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of ENFJs of the creative subtype have mistyped themselves as perceiver types. I think that when ENFJs believe they're ENFPs, or ESFPs, oftentimes it's because they are this open-ended sort of creative subtype.
I think this is the subtype of ENFJ that probably isn't going to feel comfortable being the ballast or the person that's managing or keeping the time or ensuring things happen on that timeline. This is an ENFJ that most likely will thrive in a system or a platform that subsidizes them, like not subsidize them, like literally pay for their way, but subsidizes all that energy that they could apply to management that they can now apply to the creative process, to expressing, to being more free form, to, contribute in that more expressive, creative, performative way. And that requires them to disengage from management, which a lot of people, when they think of ENFJ energy, it's like they're always in charge, they're always managing. This is not that flavor of ENFJ though.
Right, because they're not relying as much on linear thinking.
Yeah.
They have more of an overarching understanding about how things work. They're not as information and knowledge based as they are on assessing and reading a situation and having an intuitive understanding of the bigger picture. And so because of that, it's harder to sort of be directive if you don't have a linear process that you're moving through, or a linear process set up for other people to move through. So they don't really, the creative subtype doesn't really like to be in management as much, but they are very good one-on-one, and they're very good at reading a situation. And especially when it comes to direct face-to-face interaction, they are very well suited in those situations. So they do find themselves in the arts more creative pursuits, more things that sort of require you to be in the moment. Like I know quite a few creative ENFJs that are dancers, right? They really appreciate being in sort of the visceral position, or that place, that more kinesthetic experience, and sort of reading the atmosphere in that way. But they really thrive in anything that suits whatever their particular style is. So they can also be a business entrepreneur. Now, that's very different than managing people. Entrepreneurship is more of a creative, open-ended endeavor, right? It's more about trying to figure out how to make all of this work, right, in a fast-paced environment, as opposed to supervising specific people. And this also lends themselves to things like being a social influencer, being a journalist, right, using those communication skills in a fast-paced environment. But it can also lend itself to anything that merges work and play and body and mind. So a yoga instructor, right? Or somebody who is in, is a performer in the arts. As I mentioned before, dancing, but a musician. And it could also be somebody who's like a comedy writer, right? Something that's like fast-paced and fun environment where it merges everything together into one big experience. That's going to very much suit that creative subtype.
I want to make a comment here. Just again, if you're following along, you're an ENFJ. When Dr. Nardi did these brain scans, he brought people in and confirmed that they were ENFJs, and then watched the brain patterns show up on the EEG machines. And so this creative subtype, in contrast to the dominant, each of them have a different brain pattern that shows up. And the other two, normalizing and harmonizing, we're going to talk about in a moment. The other thing, though, to take into account here for the ENFJ is also the neurotransmitters and the chemicals that each of these subtypes prefer. Now, these are trends. These aren't total rules. But for example, the dominant subtype of ENFJs has a neurotransmitter bias to wanting testosterone, the chemical of testosterone. And the bias for the creative subtype is the chemical of dopamine. So a person who tends to have the brain scan obviously show up on the EEG machines like this, but also is chasing after that dopamine hit, is most likely going to be a creative subtype styled ENFJ. And then we've got I'll talk about the two other chemicals and neurotransmitters. We could do other two subtypes. But I thought that was interesting to just kind of layer that in, because the chemicals in our brains actually affect how we show up, the flavoring of our personality type.
Yeah. And the brain scans for dominant subtypes, it was more about, or a lot of the brain patterns were in the executive regions, like the prefrontal cortexes, both right and left. For creative subtypes, they had a starburst pattern, which is more about connecting all the different parts of the brain sort of simultaneously when any information comes through. And that's actually for all the types. So, or all the subtypes are going to have this style of brain wiring. So it's really interesting to sort of see how there is a flavor of ENFJ that does look more perceiver. And there's a flavor of ENFJ that looks more judger, but they're both ENFJs with ENFJ preferences. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes people struggle to find their best fit type, because they're an unusual version of their personality type.
So we've talked about the dominant ENFJ, the creative ENFJ. Now let's talk about the normalizing ENFJ. What style is this, or flavoring of ENFJ is this?
Right. So this is actually the opposite of the creative subtype. And unlike the creative subtype that doesn't really think in a linear way and doesn't have as much, that subtype doesn't really need things to be buttoned down. The normalizing ENFJ is the exact opposite. This is a more conventional and specialized version. So they are more inclined to technical work. They are more comfortable taking their time with details. Unlike the creative that really hates the mundane details, this is a subtype that actually really really does well with details. And they work in a factual, linear way, but usually to help people. All right, so it's not, they still have that extroverted feeling of harmony, or they still have the people orientation, but they're more likely or more open and willing to do more mundane tasks in behalf of, like a bigger picture that serves people. So they have good visual spatial skills with an eye for detail. They quickly notice errors. They listen and speak well. There's always going to be a communication advantage with anybody with ENFJ preferences, but they tend to be better at listening than just talking. And there's a contemplative capacity here. They do have a solid command of facts and case studies. They are leaning more heavily on knowledge and information than maybe some of their other subtypes or the other ENFJ brethren out there. And they usually are showing up in places that have a strong sense of togetherness. So just like with all the normalizing subtypes, there is a tendency to be attracted to institutions, attracted to bigger companies and businesses, not so much for the safety and security aspect of it, but more because of the togetherness aspect, because they like to find themselves in a bigger ecosystem that they feel that their attention to detail can really feed into.
Yeah, and if you contrast that with the creative subtype, for example, the creative subtype could probably be very comfortable on a platform like YouTube or selling on Etsy or building a career on a platform to be very creative and expressive. You don't necessarily need to buy into an institution. You can use a platform to augment your creativity, like economically as a career. But when we get to the normalizing, it's more likely that a normalizing ENFJ is going to say, I'm going to go for that professorship at the college or university that I want to teach at, or I want to tie myself into that business and be a manager here, or a professional, like a lawyer or doctor or professional of some sort. Like this is probably that style of ENFJ.
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to be more attracted to technical fields.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of really it's things that are more technical, things that are about education,
Teaching.
like teaching
Yeah.
other people, and things that are helpful to a bigger group. So academia actually very much fits all of those criteria. So you're going to see a lot of ENFJs, normalizing ENFJs, being attracted to things like academia. You're also going to see them in healthcare a lot. You'll see them just generally in medicine, but you'll also see them in computing, right? Because of the technical aspect, and engineering, in fact. So this is very different from the other subtypes necessarily. And there's a desire to help people in bigger ways. So there might be even some consulting or coaching that comes in here, but mostly less management, less creativity, more doing things that are known to be helpful to people, right? Like you're not just throwing spaghetti against a wall. You know that this is a solid way that helps a larger group of people. And in fact, Dario even mentions that even when they're in the arts, they still take a more conservative approach. So they like things that are structured. So if they're going to be in the arts, they might be in classical music, something to that effect. I've known of people with ENFJ preferences that teach musical theory, and they are just an encyclopedia of musical theory information. And so, so that's more of sort of this bent, less all over the place, more sort of structured.
So from a neurotransmitter chemical standpoint, this is the serotonin chemical that this subtype is going to lean more toward. In other words, they're chasing the chemical of serotonin more than the others. Have all of them, but that's the one they're more focused on. Let's talk about the wiring of the actual cognitive functions as well.
Right. So for did I mention that? I don't know if I did for the tech geeks or the
I don't think for this one yet.
Myers-Briggs geeks out there.
We can repeat ourselves if we have.
All right. If I already said it, my apologies. I'll just repeat it. So in this case, the normalizing subtype is the type that has a preference for, or at least their judging function. So in this case, extroverted feeling or harmony. That tends to be the more analytic. So that is more targeted, that's more focused, that's more assertive energy. But the perceiving function, in this case, introverted intuition or perspectives, that's the more holistic. That is the more receptive energy. And so there's more of a receiving of how society is set up, the paradigms and sort of the perspectives. There's more of a receptive energy for a worldview. But then once that is received, then there's more of an assertion of how things should be set up and done. So there's going to also be a little bit of a management component here as well. Not as much as the dominant, that definitely has more of a management flavor to it, but there is going to be a willingness to manage as a normalizing ENFJ. But as long as there's a lot of linear structure underneath that supports the management that the normalizing ENFJ is doing.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about the dominant, the creative, the normalizing. The final subtype for ENFJs is the harmonizing. You have something else to say.
I'm sorry. I forgot one more thing about this ENFJ because it's like, well, doesn't that just sound like some other type, like an SJ type?
Normalizing you're talking
about.
The
normalizing. I was going to say, unlike the creative subtype that merges work and play and body mind together.
Yeah.
The normalizing subtype separates them out. And so the career path might be a lot more conventional, but there's still going to be an intuitive side that shows up more in play and in outside of the work context.
That's a great point.
Right. And so this ENFJ might be very conventional at their job, but then do tarot readings or do dream interpretation or, something that really feeds that intuitive side, not in their career.
To that point, if you find yourself as an ENFJ that is more normalizing, you feel that way, I think your spirit and soul will die if you don't have an outlet outside of more the conventional role or career you've chosen. In other words, you do have, like Antonia said, that intuitive side. If you're a more normalizing and you pick a career path like that, ensure that you're getting those needs met. Great conversations with other intuitives, intuitive pursuits, like you said, like tarot or more woo stuff or whatever that would be for you as an ENFJ. Maybe your background doesn't lend itself that way, but it's more toward like exploratory concepts or ideas or, abstract pursuits of some sort. And make sure you're weaving that in to season your life. Otherwise, you're going to see yourself your energy is going to start to dry up. You're going to feel like less than yourself. You're going to feel less of a real empowered person, I think. Yeah.
Just like when we talk to people with SP preferences, like we discussed ESFPs that might be more normalizing.
Yeah.
A lot of times at the end of the day, they hop on a motorcycle to drive home, right? Or they have, weekends where they have to do big adventures or they like to travel. And somebody with a normalizing ENFJ style will also need to get their needs met with something that is more intuitive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, are we ready to go to harmonizing now?
Yeah.
For ENFJs. All right, let's talk about the characteristics of a harmonizing ENFJ subtype.
Okay, so harmonizing subtypes are more empathic and reflective. And in some ways, even though you can be trained into being a harmonizing subtype at any age, depending upon your family system, it usually is that people find themselves at harmonizing when they're a little older, right? This is frequently a more seasoned place. Not always, but oftentimes. So these are more quietly sophisticated ENFJs. They are good at intuitive models. They're very good at thinking and listening. They're more receptive. So for the type geeks, both the perceiving and the judging functions, both of the preferred functions are holistic or receptive. So they're less focused and driven and assertive, but they're more open and see a bigger picture. And so that means that they're really good at taking in information and listening and understanding its implication.
Neurotransmitter, this is the chemical of estrogen, is going to be more dominant here in this subtype.
Right, exactly. And their brain pattern is more of a diamond shape. And that holds true for all harmonizing subtypes. So there's kind of a unique network of brain wiring in a harmonizing ENFJ's mind. And it can show up in all sorts of very unique ways, but striking ways. Dario gives the example of like while listening to somebody, they may receive a striking visual image of what that person suffered as a child and bring that up for discussion. So there's just little things that strike them very clearly. And because of that, they have a unique way of experiencing life at this point that feels a little unusual. So these might be ENFJs that are a little unusual. In fact, in some ways, I almost see this as being The stereotypes of ENFJs, I believe, are more dominant and harmonizing than they are normalizing and creative, right?
Yeah.
Like those two are the ones that we forget about, but we see that assertive ENFJ that's kind of taking charge and in politics and righting the wrongs of the world, right? Or in corporate America or whatever. Or the mom, right? The mom ENFJ, or that assertive dad ENFJ, right? That is very certain about how things should be set up. But then we also have the like sort of the flowing ENFJ that's kind of mystical and
Sage.
woo-woo, and the sage, right? That oracle style of ENFJ.
Yeah.
And this would be closer to that style. So they still have strong executive functions, more so than other harmonizing subtypes, but they're not very good at managing other people. So they themselves can move towards goals, but they really are not comfortable trying to get other people to take motions towards those goals. So they're not good managers. That said, they are good at responding to events in a focused way, and like, or not focused, but a goal-oriented way. So they can make things happen for themselves, but they struggle to make things happen for groups. And that's not always the stereotype around ENFJs, although we can all think of that person, right? That ENFJ person probably that's more mystical and doesn't really seem to be like setting up shop anywhere, doesn't have an entrepreneurial streak necessarily, but they might be more solopreneurs. They might be setting up their own practices. And obviously, this is going to very much lend itself to psychotherapy, to counseling, to being maybe a spiritualist. Maybe this person is a tarot reader, or maybe they're a massage therapist, right? They're more one-on-one working with people and helping heal and guide in a one-to-one capacity, as opposed to trying to move large groups of people.
I think this ENFJ style has a lot slower energy cycle. In other words, they have a lot of lean back energy. Sometimes you would not guess they were an extrovert to that point. Like they have such a low energy sometimes. You're like, is this an introvert? Am I talking to an introvert right now? This does not feel like EJ energy and how I'm used to it. And that's again, because they have that holistic framework for both of their front two functions. They're more receptive and their energy's not as like, go get it. Like you got to attack this. I'm going to let it come to me. I'm going to let the energy come into my field. And then when it does, I'll work with it and I'll be in that present space.
Yeah. Just like a creative ENFJ might mistype as an ENFP or an ESFP, and the normalizing might mistype as an STJ. Interestingly enough, sometimes ENFJs mistype themselves as STJs, and that's usually because they're normalizing.
SFJs too.
And SFJs. Sometimes the dominant ENFJ, usually they know what type they are, but sometimes they'll think that they're maybe an ENTJ. I think that these ENFJs, the harmonizing, oftentimes believe they're INFJs. I think it's very common.
And they sometimes struggle with the same, like, in more so, I mean, ENFJs often struggle with the same thing INFJs struggle with, picking up people's psychic energy, knowing what they're feeling, having the feelings assault them. But I would say this is the subtype that struggles with it the most. Like it's more likely they're going to have that protection they need to create in the world against the psychic energy and garbage people are going to throw at them inadvertently, not on purpose. It just happens for NFJs. And I think this is the type that's most likely to have that.
Of the four ENFJ subtypes.
Of the four ENFJ subtypes, that's right.
Yeah, they're comfortable with time alone, reflecting, imagining, meditating, divining hidden meanings, and working with symbols, archetypes, and ideas. And so that's going to show up as being they're going to be very in touch with their intuitive side. And that means that they're going to be receptive to other people's stuff for sure. So the nice thing about being this style is that you gain great insights into people and make excellent psychotherapists and counselors and people who are tapped in and tuned into what's going on for others. The disadvantage is that you're going to be a little counterculture, have trouble merging with society, and you might actually find yourself struggling with the ordinary. Anything that's mundane or ordinary might be very difficult for you to move into. And so all four of these subtypes have a path, and they all show up doing different roles. But you can tell, like, this idea of an event planner that's on your list of the top 10 ENFJ, career paths. Clearly, event planner is going to be so much more suited to a dominant or a normalizing ENFJ than, say, a creative or a harmonizing ENFJ. They're going to have a lot more struggle with event planning. And at the same time, there are other things on your list that are going to very much suit the creative and the, harmonizing, that really wouldn't suit the dominant or the normalizing.
A couple things about this. Again, we just want to reiterate. Your subtype can influence the career you choose, and the career you choose as an ENFJ can influence the subtype you show up as. These two things work in tandem. Again, a subtype is not a personality type. These are just flavorings. These are just the ways, these are the energies you're leaning into. They're often socialized or conditioned through the work you take on, through the family system you came from, through society you're engaged with. And you can alter these. You can lean into another energy. And on a maturation timeline, as you mature through life, you might start off life when you're young in one of these energies. And as you grow and mature, you might find other expressions of yourself, and you might lean into others of these energies. You might find yourself later in life, maybe at midlife, resetting from maybe being more that dominant. You chill out, you lean back. Maybe you tip over more to the creative. You're more open in the creative space and you're not so dominant in leading things. You're more expressive. Or maybe you go into harmonizing. Like you can actually flex and flow with this over time. So I think the thing we'd want you to look at right now as an ENFJ is to say, which one do I tend to feel is more me? Which one do I think is explaining the type of flavoring of ENFJ that I am? And then am I in a career path? Have I chosen a career, or am I looking to choose a career that would speak to that energy? Does that support me? Or maybe you want to be a little bit of a different subtype. Maybe you're not dominant. Maybe you're more harmonizing, but you want to lean more into your assertive energy, maybe bring a little bit more of yourself and your management, maybe picking a career path that will help activate that part of you. It requires you to step into leadership. It requires you to step up. Well, now you're going to start wiring yourself and start moving yourself that direction. So I think these things can work in tandem as we think about our career paths going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I love the idea of getting ready for something else in your life and then choosing a career that helps mold you into that. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. So it's not just as simple as ENFJ careers. It's more, who do I want to become and what are the choices I'm making that will help get me there? And it's okay if you love your job, you love your career, and it's suiting your subtype, and there's no place else that you really want to go. There's nothing else that you really want to move into yet. That's perfectly fine. But if you find yourself being pulled a certain direction, like you said, Joel, maybe I want to be a little bit more assertive. Maybe I want to have more leadership skill. Maybe I need to move into one of the subtypes or get a job that will require me to flex that part of who I am. Or maybe it's time for me to move into a more psycho-spiritual place in my life. Maybe I'm starting to feel called to that, and then looking for careers or at least maybe very intense hobbies that will help build those parts of who you are.
I know some FJs express being in a career path. Sometimes they feel overlooked and not honored. What they say is not respected or heard. And what I'd also encourage, if you're an ENFJ in like the corporate world and you find yourself not being heard, maybe there's some energies available to you that you could exercise or lean into. You don't necessarily become a whole new subtype. You don't have to lean fully into the dominant subtype, let's say. Let's say you're more of the normalizing and you speak up in like a meeting and people aren't taking you serious, or they're just not listening to you. Well, maybe there's a way you can access more of that assertive energy. You can do some exercises and focus. Oh, I could bring more of an assertive energy for my two functions. And now I'm being heard in meetings. Now I'm actually getting my ideas out there. And that gives, I think, people a little bit more flexibility in how they show up to the world. You have aspects of yourself that maybe you could exercise that you haven't even tapped into yet that are available to you. You don't have to become a different personality type. It's available to you as an ENFJ, and you can lean into that and see better results, even in the career that you're already in, as you're wired, the subtype you're comfortable with. I think that's also something to think about, is to lean into some of those just contextually in different aspects.
Yeah. In fact, interestingly enough, sometimes it's people who have that more assertive, say, extroverted feeling or harmony that struggle to be heard. And sometimes they need to lean into the more holistic version, which is the more sort of saying things in a way that is more seducing, like a person's perspective than it is asserting a perspective.
There you go.
And so whatever it is that you're experiencing, like you said, Joel, there's another side. There's like money on the table of things that you can be developing with your personality type that helps you, carve that path, find the right position or career, be taken more seriously, show up as your best self. I love that type helps us identify some of those things.
Yeah. So we want to see you successful in your career as an ENFJ. What's coming up for you as we talk? You haven't had a microphone. I'm sure you want to say some things. So come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, but more importantly, share your ENFJ career story with us. Where are you at in your career? Are you just out of university, high school? You're starting into your career for the first time? Are you in a transition moment? Have you been in a very successful career you've loved for the last 2 decades, 3 decades, and you just couldn't think of anything else, and you want to express to us how that shaped for you, like how your path found you where you're at? Which one of these subtypes do you identify with? Are you more identifying with one and you're like, wow, I'm totally in the wrong career for how I identify. I think I should probably make a big change. Or it's just a little change that I can discover here. We want to hear from you. Come over again to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. It helps me out a lot because I read them all, and it's that little extra oomph that keeps us going, right? If I know people are listening and I know that they're enjoying it, I want to keep going. So if you leave a review on iTunes, it helps me out a lot. This is also a video podcast. You might be watching us on YouTube right now. And if so, please like the episode. If you really love our stuff, you can subscribe and hit the little bell that lets you know when a new episode is coming out. And of course, you can also leave a comment under this episode. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on iTunes or Amazon, that also helps us out a lot. And if you're trying to figure out your best fit type, maybe you are starting to question, or perhaps you don't know what your type is at all, head over to personalityhacker.com and you can take our free online assessment. It is a great starting point to help orientate you as you're doing your journey to find, or going through your journey to find your best fit type. So head over to personalityhacker.com and go take the free online assessment.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.